Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday, November 8th, 2017 meeting of the City of Ann Arbor Planning Commission. Commission public meetings are typically held the first and third Tuesdays of each month. Today we're on Wednesday because of the election yesterday. But meetings offer the opportunity for public citizens to address the commission, and all persons are certainly encouraged to participate. Any citizens requiring special accommodations such as sign language or other services that are reasonable may contact the clerk's office at 734-794-6140 or via email. Requests need to be received at least 2 business days in advance of the meeting. Planning Commission meeting agendas and packets are available from the Legislative Information Center on the City Clerk's webpage or on the first floor of City Hall the Friday before the meeting. We'll start with a roll call.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Briggs.
Here.
Commissioner Klein.
Here.
Commissioner Gibb-Randall.
Here.
Commissioner Mills.
Here.
Commissioner Milstein.
Here.
Commissioner Trudeau.
Here.
Commissioner Weatherby.
Here.
Commissioner Woods. We have quorum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leonard. Next item is approval of the agenda. It's a big one tonight. Can I have Commissioner move and second the agenda? I think Commissioner Milstein first and Commissioner Gibb-Randall seconded. All in favor of the agenda as presented, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's everybody. And the next item is introductions, and we don't have any this evening, so we'll go beyond that. And likewise, we don't have any minutes from previous meetings, so we'll skip that. Next up, item 6 are reports from administration, city council, planning manager, and commission officers and committees. As always, we start with city council. Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is a weird week. We're here on a Wednesday, which means City Council will be here tomorrow. So fewer updates than usual. Things of note is there happened to be an election yesterday in which incumbents throughout the city won their re-election campaigns. So not too much change on council, or not too much change on council since August. Additionally, the county's public safety and mental health millage, it's been a long week leading up to the general, went through. With that comes a rebate from the county back to the city of somewhere around $2.5 million. City Council had expressed an interest in using that to fund 40% towards sustainability efforts, which has been a stated priority of this body, 40% to affordable housing, another priority of this body, and 20% to pedestrian and cyclist safety, a third priority of this body. The details of how that will materialize are to come throughout the budgeting process that will take place in the coming several months. We also have moved to a 2-year budgeting process, this being the second coming year. So really material changes, it may not be seen in full effect for another fiscal year. In addition to that, also important to note that tomorrow is the second reading for the rezoning of the Lower Town property, 1140 Broadway. Also being heard will be the site plan and the brownfield plan, which means 3 public hearings on 1140 Broadway. So if anyone in the audience has 9 minutes worth of things to say about the property, I encourage them to come and share their thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman, and congratulations on your reelection. Hopefully you'll be with us for another couple of years then on this body. Planning Manager Leonard, anything to report?
Sure, a few quick updates. First of all, on upcoming meetings, on the 14th, we will be having a working session where we'll be, at the Planning Commission's request, there was a desire to spend a little bit of time on the capital improvement plan and how projects end up in it. What is the prioritization process? What's the ranking process? So on the 14th, we will be delving into that. We'll have staff from systems planning to present that and then provide plenty of time for your questions. We'll also be reviewing a draft version of this upcoming capital improvement plan as well. Then the normal meeting for the 21st, I'm going to convert that meeting from a regular Planning Commission meeting to a working session as well. We're going to be diving into the final draft of Zorro. So So that'll give us an opportunity just to do that. We won't, obviously, as a working session, we're not going to ask for any action, but wanted to dedicate a meeting so we can really unpack that with the full planning commission and bring everybody up to speed. Hopefully sticking to a adoption calendar that I'll be presenting that to city councils in early next year in January. So a couple other quick updates. One, as you're aware, we also on the 14th working session, we're going to be holding one of a series of sort of stakeholder early input sessions with our consultant Giffords-Webster on the work on updating our sign code. So that will be the second half of the working session on the 14th. Additionally, you'll see on the screens, we are going to be, this is already linked off our website, but we have, with the consultant, we've put together a website that the general public is, we encourage to utilize. It's pretty user-friendly. You can use your smartphone or any device. Snap a picture of a sign in the city that you think is particularly good. Maybe it's particularly bad. Tell us what you like about it, what you don't like about it, what we could do better. And we're going to try to use this as one of the input tools in trying to craft a new sign ordinance. In addition to the Planning Commission session, we're going to be holding similar sessions on the sign code with the Historic District Commission and the Downtown Development Authority. And then finally, we have 3 upcoming public meetings on the proposed draft solar ordinance. You may recall that upon presentation of the solar ground-mounted solar ordinance to City Council, that they directed staff to hold some additional neighborhood meetings. So we have meetings scheduled for Thursday, November 16th at the Ann Arbor Senior Center, Tuesday, November 28th at the library Westgate, at the Westgate Branch Library on Jackson Avenue, and Thursday, November 30th at Clegg Middle School. And then finally, I'm sorry I don't have the confirmed date yet, but probably also around that time in late November, we will be also scheduling a public meeting to present the final draft of Zorro as well.
Well, thank you for that update. We're busy. I encourage everyone to bring their coffee on the 21st for our Zorro meeting. And how long do people have to do the picture thing for signs?
We haven't set a close date, but at least 30 to 45 days.
Okay, great. That's a great. Looks like a great opportunity to weigh in. Yes, from Planning Commission officers and committee, Commissioner Gibb Randall.
This is a report from the Environmental Commission. We had an interesting report on dark skies, and it got me thinking about how we handle exterior lighting, and that we ask for a photometric plan with site plan submission in which the plan is not allowed to have any foot candles leaving the site at the site's edge, but I think that the building lighting is often not part of that plan. And so what the person who was presenting was showing some interesting examples of fairly recent projects that have gone through that have a lot of uplighting, and that's some of the worst type. And so there seems to be a gap somewhere because I think that the building, when we see it, is pretty general in terms of its elevations. They certainly have not worked out all of the final details about exterior lighting and things like that. And I think that there might be some places where we might, somehow within the city's process, that there's a little bit more control over what happens with some of that final exterior building lighting, because there's a lot that's just going straight up into the sky, and that's some of the worst for birds and things like that. So just noticing that there's a gap in our process somewhere in there, and that there should be some way to be able to get on top of that better, so that with a little bit more education and things like that, that people can be making the good sound choices for still how to light their building without interfering with bird flying patterns and things like that.
Seems like that might be a good item for us to put on our list of things for working sessions coming up, and maybe over this winter we give staff some time to do a little background work on it, and we dedicate a working session or part of a working session to kind of educating ourselves and seeing if there's anything else we can do.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Other officers or commission committee reports? No? Okay, I don't have any either. We have several written communications that were in your packet, either electronically or printed out for you. Direct those to your attention. Not a huge volume, but there are some here. I think in the particular one that pertains to tonight's public hearing from the AATA. And It's going to take us to our next item, which is item 7, audience participation. This is the first opportunity for those here from the public to address the commission on any item that is not on the agenda. So if you want to speak about the Treeline master plan, this is not that time. This is for other things that you'll have an opportunity on Treeline in just a couple minutes. But if you'd like to address the commission on any other item, please step up to the podium where Mr. Leonard is, I think, getting the computer to work. You may speak for up to 3 minutes, and we ask you, as usual, to identify yourself by name and address in the city.
Jim Owenson, 2422 Packard. I used to be around much more often. Recently, I have a regular meeting with some student activists on Tuesday night. It's going to get over, but I just wanted to share a couple thoughts on things that are on the agenda. It was probably back in every year, the Planning Commission has a public hearing to ask people what kind of elements should be in the master plan. Not surprisingly, not very well attended. Okay. It's not very well attended. And so about 2003, I came in and I looked, and there was one element that was really old, from 1973. And so I pointed out that, and if you look at it, think of it as a GIS file, the lowest level is the zoning code, right? And then you have the area plans on top. And this was an element that was done, and it gave a basic overview about what the master plan should look like. You know, we're going to have traffic coming in on Packard and Plymouth, and right, it was very high-level stuff. And I pointed out, I thought that this should be revised. And at the next meeting, the Planning Commission said, Mr. Mogensen, you made a very good point. It's very old. We're going to take it out. But do not be afraid. We'll bring it back in. Never happened for, you know, these things happen. But I think it's important to have that kind of a process. Because right now what's happening is people are, that kind of a process, that hasn't happened. And so what is our vision for how Ann Arbor is supposed to work? How is the transportation supposed to work? How, not in specific projects. Because what's not happening now is some of the density is happening in places where there's inadequate transportation and those kind of things. And so it's important to have that process, and I think it would be less involved than having a whole area plan thing. I think there's a possibility to do that. Secondly, I looked on the agenda, there's a thing about the proposed land division. I said, well, that's kind of odd. And so I looked at it, and it's the Inglis house. And, you know, I've completely lost track as to whether or not the historic district went through or anything. But that is one of those things where it should be this proposed land division on Inglis house, so people are searching for that kind of thing can find it, because, you know, it's hard to find things out. And the last thing relates to student housing. There is really no such thing as student housing. If you look at the Human Rights Ordinance, it says, you shall not discriminate based on student status. It doesn't say you shouldn't discriminate against students. It says you shouldn't discriminate based on student status, and it's very clear. And that includes non-student status. The proposal that's up on off of Plymouth Road and Broadway, that was controversial. The university required that developer to make sure only students were there. And there was this back and forth with the lawyers, and they just kind of basically compromised. We're just going to allow it to happen, even though it's, you know, officially violates the ordinance. We're just going to allow it to happen, and, you know, hope that no. And if you look at that, it says student housing right on front, even though that's not supposed to happen. And I think it's important from a planning process, because if you assume students are going to be there, you're going to make assumptions about the infrastructure necessary to have that happen. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughtful comments. Anyone else like to address the commission during this audience participation time? Okay, seeing no one else, I'm going to go on to the next item, which is public hearing scheduled for the next business meeting, and we don't have any at this point. And that takes us to item 9, which is regular business. We have one item on the agenda, and probably will take some time. We're going to start with a staff report, followed by I think there's going to be a presentation, and then we'll have a public hearing and then commission discussion. So the item is the City of Ann Arbor Planning Commission will consider an amendment to the city master plan through adoption of the Treeline Allen Creek Urban Trail Master Plan. The plan will be considered as an element of the city master plan. Mr. Khan, are you going to do a brief staff report?
Thank you. I'm going to quickly summarize the staff report and then turn it over to Connie Pulsifer from our systems planning group, as well as a representative of the consultant who do want to provide a presentation. Just in terms of background, in 2011, City Council passed a resolution in support of the Allen Creek Greenway, which we now refer to as the Treeline, recognizing its ability to address existing inadequacies in non-motorized connections within the community, and specifically to the Huron River. In the spring of 2015, City Council passed a resolution to adopt the fiscal year 2016 budget, which included funding for a master plan for the tree line. The city soon thereafter hired Smith Group JJR to assist in crafting the plan. A Citizens Advisory Committee was formed to provide direction on the planning effort. 6 Citizens Advisory Committee meetings were held between May of 2016 and September of 2017. 3 community-wide meetings were held to provide feedback through the course of the planning effort. Members of the public will also have an opportunity to provide comment here at the Planning Commission, as well as the upcoming City Council public hearing. With regard to major issues, a variety of issues were raised during the planning process, including, among others, tight physical constraints, large grade elevation changes, difficult street crossings, public ownership, property ownership, safety, the cost of funding of capital improvements in a very complex urban environment. With regard to public notice, City Council authorized the distribution of the draft plan on September 5th from adjoining jurisdictions and stakeholders. Staff recommends that the Treeline Allen Creek Urban Trail Master Plan be adopted as an element of the City of Ann Arbor's master plan. Staff also recommends that the draft of the Treeline Allen Creek Urban Trail Master Plan be forwarded to City Council for approval. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. So, Ms. Pulsifer, are you going to start this off? Okay.
So thank you for having us here tonight. Do a quick introduction here. My name is Connie Pulsifer. I am the project manager for the Treeline. I reside in the Systems Planning Unit. And to my right here is my project manager counterpart from Smith Group JJR, Oliver Kiley. And tonight we're going to go through a presentation, and I'll show you what that's all about. Before we get started, I want to thank Commissioner Mills, the Planning Commission representative on our project's Citizen Advisory Committee, for her really good work in guiding the plan over the past 18 months with other Citizen Advisory Committee members. So thank you. So what we're going to do tonight is condense 18 months of work into a 30-minute presentation, and then we will certainly stay for discussion. The presentation is going to be in 5 parts. I'm going to give a brief overview of how we got here, why we're here tonight, the process that we used. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Oliver Kiley to talk about the framework plan, the technical aspects of this project. We'll be addressing implementation and next steps, and then of course after the public hearing, discussion. So this was previously referred to as the Allen Creek Greenway. There was a name change through this process to the Treeline. This has been an idea for an urban trail that's been talked about in the community along the Allen Creek floodplain and the rail corridor that goes through the core of downtown. It's been discussed for decades within the community. The Treeline master plan process, as directed by City Council, focuses primarily on identifying a non-motorized connection across the study area. while recognizing that the tree line can also provide other opportunities for improvement through parallel or coordinated projects. So what's different about this than the dozen or so other reports that have been done and very useful to this project team through the process, through various groups and student groups? And the difference is City Council placed this as a priority and provided funding and directed staff to develop a master plan that describes a feasible route. So we were charged with hiring a firm that could look at the technical aspects of this, and we chose a firm that has a lot of experience with urban trails. And the difference here is, so the question is what does feasible mean? And it means defining a route that addresses really the following considerations. Property access was first and foremost. The plan that you're going to see tonight is a result of hours of conversations with not only private property owners, but Watco, the holding company for the Ann Arbor Railroad that operates the short line freight line through the center of downtown, and other property owners who've shown a willingness for their property to be included in the plan. And we'll get into that in more detail when we define the route. The other consideration is physical constraints. The trail alignment that you'll see tonight is located in physical space and locations where engineering constraints will not preclude construction. So we were able to take a deep dive on this and really get a good handle on those two primary considerations, which makes it somewhat different than some of the previous studies that defined a vision. So what we're going to do is walk through first to show you what the study area and the context is. Before I say anything else, north is on the right of all the plans that you see, somewhat different convention, but it works for these monitors. And so all the plan view drawings you see tonight, north will be on the right. So the project area is defined by its north boundary in the A here, which is at Main Street, and the dashed line that you see on your map is the existing border-to-border trail, and it continues roughly along the valley of the Allen Creek floodway down to its south boundary at South State Street and Stimson, approximately in the location of Salvation Army. Interesting to note that City Council passed a resolution that asked staff to consider a future phase of this project, connecting from Stimson all the way down to Ellsworth, which is the southern city boundary. So stay tuned for future project studies. It's not yet in the CIP, but we are thinking about this as we look at other opportunities along State Street corridor. We want to make sure we don't do anything that would preclude future alignment down that corridor. So the tree line is all about connecting the core of Ann Arbor through its most active areas. We call it connecting Ann Arbor's dots. We had an opportunity to present this to Tom Wywoody. He's the director of the Greenways Initiative from the Community Foundation for Southeastern Michigan. And I think he said it best when he was able to weigh in on this concept. He said the tree line is a delivery system for creating a healthier way to live in Ann Arbor and will improve the way we relate to each other. So we want to talk about how that's been made possible. We're going to go through several key issues and considerations. I'm not going to read these tonight, but something to be thinking about as we go through the route alignment is this feasibility component that we talked about and that physical constraint component. We really want to focus on that in our presentation tonight. The plan responds to 10 of the city's 16 sustainability framework goals, and it advances non-motorized opportunities to reduce greenhouse gases, the use of sustainable materials. It advances the city's green streets policy and stormwater management opportunities. The planning process for the tree line consisted of a project management team that crossed units throughout the city. a technical advisory committee that reached outside of our organization to Washtenaw County folks who could bring a certain perspective to this project. An all-volunteer citizen advisory committee. We had no cap on the limit of citizen advisory committee members, and I can't say enough good things about their involvement. Involved every step of the way and really helped guide the direction of this plan. We had stakeholder focus group meetings and engaged community leaders and residents in shaping really the scope, the content, and the direction of the plan that you'll see tonight during participation at 13 public meetings. I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Kiley, who is going to talk about the technical aspects of the Treeline framework.
Thanks, Connie. My voice is a little gravelly today. I'm getting over something that my 3-year-old brought home, so we'll start with that. Okay, so switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about the kind of technical side of the Treeline. And as Connie mentioned, you know, part of the rebranding, so to speak, of this from the Allen Creek Greenway to the Treeline as an urban trail, part of that was to re-emphasize what our charge was coming out of City Council, to really look at what's the feasible route for this non-motorized connection. And that was really something that we recognized is kind of going to be the backbone for what could eventually become a bigger greenway. But setting the stage, getting that trail component built, getting something that people can use as part of this urban trail, that was a really important part of this effort, and then recognizing that other things can be layered onto that. And so this urban trail notion is really trying to respond to the complicated urban environment that we're in. There's a lot of property owners, lots of streets, lots of infrastructure, lots of different things to deal with, and so we wanted to kind of set that tone and that expectation. That said, you'll see throughout that this trail is really intended to be something that's usable by all users, all ages, all abilities. So whether you're biking or in a wheelchair or walking or jogging, that this is something that is accessible and usable by everybody in the community. And you know, really coming out of our engagement with our Citizens Advisory Committee, very strong preference for having this off-street trail, and you'll see that reflected in a lot of the alignment as we get into the details of the route. And really that was trying to avoid a lot of the major road crossings that pose challenges for pedestrians and cyclists getting around town. And then as Connie mentioned, you know, some of these other opportunities through coordinating projects or parallel projects, with the trail being developed and built over time, those opportunities to add other secondary connections that help connect neighborhoods or connect business areas into the trail can be looked at, as well as larger open spaces, or as property availability comes up or things become available, we can start to look at where opportunities for other open space or other kinds of uses parallel to the trail might be present. I'm not going to read through these. Throughout the planning process, you know, this is a master plan, so we're fairly high level, but we get a lot of questions from the public, you know, is this going to be paved or is this dirt? Is it going to be lit? Are there going to be benches? So this is kind of our assumption, and we use these assumptions to inform a lot of the cost estimating for the project as well, as far as what those amenities and those features would be of the trail. So it will be paved, there will be pedestrian lighting. It includes a lot of allowance for landscaping and things like that parallel to the trail. Managing stormwater and runoff that's generated by the trail and by paved surfaces, that would be incorporated at a minimum into the design. It's worth pointing out there that this really isn't designed or intended to be a flood control project. There's been a lot of discussion about the overlap potential between the Allen Creek Greenway and the Treeline and how it could help with flood management in the city. Again, that's a case where there's maybe parallel opportunities where flood control projects can come online, and that might have a benefit for the Treeline or vice versa. So we want to be looking at that, but that's not a primary driver of the design of the trail. Okay, a little bit about the kind of trail cross-section and what we used as our assumptions for the design and the layout of this. In general, what we tried to achieve is a 30-foot wide corridor for the primary trail. And that would accommodate up to about 20 feet of pavement, depending on location, where you can get a separation between pedestrian and bicycle traffic. We think there'll be pretty high usership on here. And, again, that was a point from a safety concern that was coming out of the CAC and others, and then just best practices as well, where you have those higher volumes. Starting to separate out some of those uses can be really good. We heard a lot about points on the border-to-border trail, for instance, where you're getting conflicts between bicycles and runners, and if we can make it a little bit safer and provide more pavement width, that was pretty important. Within that 30 feet, though, that then allows space for clear zones, amenity strips, landscaping, things like that along the corridor. And certainly where there's opportunity to have more land next to the primary trail corridor, we'd certainly be looking for those opportunities as this is built to create additional green space, additional space for habitat or greenery or things like that. And just a note on this too, as we were looking at the design, the stormwater management would probably be a combination of some bioswales, but also some underground storage and infiltration. But that has to really be vetted on a site-by-site basis in subsequent design phases. Just a note too, so one of the long-standing kind of assumptions in a lot of the prior planning work that's gone around the Allen Creek Greenway was this idea that the trail could be within the railroad corridor. We spent a lot of time sitting down and looking at, what would that really mean to have a trail in the rail corridor, and then talking with Watco and Ann Arbor Railroad, both about what those impacts might be. And a couple things to point out. The railroad corridor on average is about 50 feet wide as it goes through most of the community. In some cases it's narrower than that, in some cases it's wider. Generally the tracks are right in the middle of that, and you have to have 9 feet of clear from the center of the tracks out as a clear zone on both sides of the center of the track. So that only leaves 16 feet on each side, on either side of the railroad track to accommodate a trail. Well, if we're trying to get 20 feet of pavement in there plus landscape and other amenities, it's just not going to fit within the rail corridor. And so you're going to have to go onto adjacent property, whether that's public or private land, if that's the design approach that we want to take. And so in a lot of cases that then kind of shifted the conversation and said, well, if we need to get on private property, maybe that's just what we should be looking at trying to do, get easements, get access, things like that to be able to access that property. That said, there are some sections that we've been working with the rail company and maybe locating the trail through the portions of their corridor where there is more separation, where we can achieve that vision and have that clearance. There are also on-street sections that are proposed. And in general, for the on-street sections, the approach would be widen a sidewalk on one side of the road, and then add a separated or protected bicycle facility. So maybe you've heard those called cycle tracks in other communities. That would require re-engineering part of the road, and at a minimum, probably taking parking away from one side of the street, depending on the location where we are. To build that, but you could then rebuild the street and incorporate stormwater management kinds of things all along the street corridor as well. So that's kind of the approach for the on-street sections. And then just a note too, you'll see as we walk through the plan, there's a number of bridges that are proposed over some of the major roadways. And so this is just a cross-section showing that ramped environment going up to where those bridge crossings are. And the idea with this is that, if we imagine this is coming towards a street and towards where one of the bridges is, down on the street level within that 30-foot wide corridor, you could still have a sidewalk that connects out to the street sidewalk to be able to get people access back into where that ramp starts, or in some configurations. So those can double as access points as well. Okay, so a couple kind of terminology pieces as we walk through what the alignment is. You'll see thicker, wider lines, which is referencing what we're calling the primary trail. So that's the main trail alignment that's moving north to south. There's thinner lines that we're calling near-term opportunities. So you'll see, we'll talk about some of the phasing a little bit later, but there may be points where, we can build a primary section, but while we're waiting for another piece to be built, there may be near-term improvements that we can do on the street to make a connection or to link portions of this together. The key thing about those near-term improvements is the intent is that those become beneficial improvements from a pedestrian or bicycling standpoint, regardless of how the ultimate design of the trail shows up. So the point is not to make something that becomes irrelevant when the main trail is built, but something that adds to and complements the main trail alignment. Excuse me. Okay, so there were kind of 5 key things. We're going to zoom in on this map and kind of walk through it piece by piece. But there were really 5 main things that inform the overall alignment. As Connie mentioned, one of them is the feasibility piece, and so that was primarily property access and kind of the engineering constraints. So can we fit the trail in here? Does that side of it work? And then in meeting with many, many property owners and working with the Treeline Conservancy to meet with property owners and kind of ask the question, are you comfortable having your having this route shown on your property? And every property owner that we talked to that said yes, that's where the route ended up being. So if property owners said no, I'm not interested, don't go there, the route was adjusted to reflect that. The second key point was continuity. So trying to create, as an urban trail, you could end up, designing it so that you have to stop at every single street crossing, or you can design it in a way that you stop at key points, but you can also provide a more continuous experience for people. And in the interest of trying to connect down to the riverfront and really get people to that location, we thought that was an important thing to do. User experience and safety is a key point. Connecting to those assets and community destinations, and then also looking for opportunities to create something really unique and special along the trail as well. So we'll touch on some of those opportunities. So I'm going to go through this next section relatively quickly, and we can always circle back if there's questions about particular spots. This is on the north end. I'll come down and where that purple spiral piece is, we'll talk more about that on the next slide. Just want to mention this one. Some of the alternative or not near term, but alternate routes that we kind of kept in our back pocket was a potential connection through Bluffs Nature Area with a bridge over North Main and the MDOT rail, and then some kind of access ramp down to the border-to-border trail in Bandemere Park. So that's something that's not being pursued as the main trail alignment, but it's something that we met with the mountain biking group as well as the NAP to kind of talk about what the impacts of that might be. So that's something to think about long-term, or could be an alternative if something else doesn't work out. As for the main trail, there's 2 things to note on this slide, and this is the most confusing of all of them. One is the big purple line going from the bottom up to the black dash line. That is currently in a design and engineering phase right now, and that is the berm connection. That is a stormwater relief tunnel that's being cut underneath the MDOT rail line. There's a parallel pedestrian tunnel being built as part of that, with a trail following along the railroad tracks and coming out to the street at Depot and 5th Ave. And then as part of that as well, there's a pedestrian tunnel on the other side to the north that would cross over the Allen Creek outlet and connect over to the border-to-border trail by the Argo Dam. From there, we're proposing some kind of a ramp. You'll see an example of it being drawn as a spiral ramp. There's other ways that could be designed, with a pedestrian bridge over the MDOT rail and over North Main Street to the corner of Wilt and Summit. One of the reasons we've kind of been asked about, well, if you have this tunnel connection under the river, why are you doing the bridge and all that? Really, one of the major obstacles in this entire part of town is crossing North Main Street. It's a very difficult, not very safe street to cross. A lot of turning movements, a lot of traffic coming off the highway going to the hospital. So this provides a way of people getting around that, and also by having kind of 2 routes feeding into the river, you can grab people that are trying to get from the east and the south over to the river, as well as people that are to the west over to the river. The trail would follow along Wilt Street, cross at grade at Sunset, or at Summit, excuse me. And then I'm gonna shift slides here. It would go through 721 North Main along the west edge of the property. The green line, there's an old railroad spur that goes down to grade at Felch Street, so it would be using this rail spur, crossing Felch Street, and then at where Kingsley Condominiums is, at 221 Felch Street. As part of that site plan review, there's a 30-foot easement that was secured for a future trail. So that connection would go through that property out to Kingsley at first. Be a short on-street section, and then it would dive back onto private property. And then I'll just point out on this, the solid lines are on grade, and then the dashed lines is where it goes into a ramped condition. So it would ramp, bridge over bridge over Miller, come back to grade and tunnel actually underneath the railroad berm, and go west. There's a connection out to Chapin to West Park. And then it would continue. The main branch would go from that point south. It would ramp up again, bridge over Huron Street, and then stay in a ramped condition with a few points of access and follow parallel to the railroad tracks, past the Y, through 415 West Washington, and then come back to grade at Liberty as the railroad tracks come back to grade. It would then turn down Liberty. And first in Liberty, we're identifying that as kind of a major gateway point. So that becomes the key point for the trail to access the downtown. And so, there's been a lot of discussion about how will this work to help facilitate people that are maybe going, to the Argo Riverfront or to the Cascades. If they want to be there and be able to come downtown to, eat or shop or do other activities, this becomes a really good way of starting to move people between those two key points in town. From there, the trail would go, follow mostly within the street right away down First Street, switch onto private property south of William, and so that's one of the Fingerly parking lots right now. So it continues south out to Ashley Street, small section on street on Ashley, and then it would ramp up and bridge over Main Street, Madison, and then where the new development is at 615 South Main. There's a 15-foot easement that was secured for the trail as part of that development. So we would utilize that and drop back down to grade at Mosley and then head over towards Hill Street. So that's that section. And then from Hill Street, we would cross at Hill, go down Green to Hoover, and these are all on-street sections. We would go down Hoover to State Street, and then turn and head south on State towards the end of the limit of this project area. One note, along Hoover and State Street, there is a lot of opportunity as part of this to improve mid-block crossings, and the crossings along there, there's a lot of student activity and other traffic crossing the streets. None of those crossings except for State and Hoover are signalized, and even that isn't a complete intersection for pedestrian crossing, so trying to make improvements there as part of improving and building the trail section. And then eventually ending at State and Stimson. Okay, I have a few minutes left. So this is just a few kind of illustrative images of what some of these key points could start to look like. This was one idea of a configuration for a spiral ramp trail. There's a lot of examples of these that have been built around the country and around the world. Something to think about on this, this could be a very signature moment or opportunity in the trail where, if you were able to build a deck or a platform up there, you'd have pretty magnificent views up and down the river of the city, of the skyline. That could be a real anchor and a draw for people, as well as being something visual as kind of a gateway as people come into town on Ann Arbor. Just an example of the crossing at Summit and kind of going into 721 North Main. This is looking north at the bridge over Huron Street. If you were looking out of one of the YMCA windows, it's about where that is. Looking at that Liberty Street gateway. Again, these are all very conceptual in nature, but the idea of these is to try and really start to slow down traffic, create a little bit of a moment, and very clear sense of identity for the trail coming through this particular area. And then a shot of the one potential orientation for the bridge going over North Main. or South Main, excuse me. Okay, a few points on implementation. The Treeline Conservancy is working right now with the city to put together a business plan for how to get this built. And there's three main pieces of that. One is the governance, which is looking at who owns, maintains, operates the trail. Similar to, say, the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy. In this case, one option is that the Treeline Conservancy would really own the facilities and be responsible for the maintenance and the operation of them. And the city would own the actual land and the property that it sits on. The other piece of it, of course, the second element of their planning work is the financial side of it. And, it's important to think about, not just the capital costs, but also those ongoing maintenance costs, in that, as money is brought in for raising money on the capital side, that an endowment be set up or other kinds of funding instruments be set up to cover those ongoing maintenance costs. Needless to say, a very broad range of funding is being looked at, that the Treeline Conservancy is looking at to fund this. So grants, donations, working with the philanthropic community, public, business, and private citizen sponsorship. All of those kinds of things need to really be on the table to think about how this vision can happen. And again, that's very similar to how other urban trails are built in other communities. It takes a very broad base of partnership pulling together to get these built. This is the most boring slide in the presentation, but very important. But we're not going to read about it tonight. So these are all the maintenance kind of activities that we need to be thinking about. And then the last part of it, the implementation, is really thinking about that phasing strategy. So how do we build this? What comes online first? What comes online later? How do we use those early wins and those early developments to maybe set the stage for building out the rest of it, or maybe changing the nature of how the rest of it is built? So something that kind of one way of framing it that we looked at, we kind of broke it into 3 zones. This north zone would go essentially from Argo down to that kind of down to the William Street area. There's a few sections within that of privately owned property, but a lot of that is either within street right-of-way or within rail property, where we think we have the room and the ability to have the trail within that rail right-of-way. So that seems like a big section that would be kind of starting from the north and working our way south. The central zone is largely on private property, with quite a few private property owners to work with. And then the south zone is primarily a combination of, is primarily within the public right-of-way. Just a little bit of detail on the north zone in the last minute or so here. So we started to also break this down into some smaller chunks. Section B is already being in design and engineering phase. Section A would be a logical next chunk to work on, and that would really make a very critical connection over North Main and over to the border-to-border trail. And then Section C goes from that bridge point all the way down to Kingsley Street, essentially. And so that whole section is either public land, rail property, or parcels that we've already got an easement agreement for the trail. So potentially A, B, and C, as the first chunk to bite off, seems pretty feasible and pretty realistic to work towards. And of course, you probably have seen some of the numbers around the cost estimate for that. This was, a construction cost, but it did include those soft costs for design and engineering, permitting, geotech, design and construction contingencies, all of those kinds of things. This did not include some of the costs that we can't really predict or estimate very well right now, and so things like property acquisition or ownership. If the city wants to piggyback other utility projects on this, we don't know what those all are yet. Or similarly, if there's environmental remediation issues that we need to tackle, those aren't included in this estimate either. We did some benchmarking against other similar kind of high-profile urban trail projects, and the Treeline is within that realm. So the 606 is a very similar kind of elevated urban trail that goes through a variety, similar length, similar kind of density and mix of urban context. The Indianapolis Cultural Trail is all on street, or is on, is on street. And then people ask about the High Line, that costs a whole lot more money, so just
New York.
temper the expectations a little on that one. And the elevated trail was built, or, the elevated portion was already built for that, right? Okay.
So I just want to address one of the most frequently asked questions on this project, and that is, what if conditions change? Can this alignment be modified? So the plan is designed to be flexible, to respond to changing circumstances. It's opportunistic if something comes up or a property owner decides they want to be a partner in this and aren't currently shown in the plan. We will engage and modify the alignment if it makes it better. So this it can include opportunities for complementary open space and other supporting features too. So it has this flexibility built in without having to kind of go back and change the plan and go through the approval process again. It's built into the plan. So we are at the end of our approval process timeline. Tonight, of course, is our public hearing for this project, and we are trying to stay on track for December 18th City Council action. So that's where we are, and Oliver and I will sit down and let the public hearing begin.
Okay. Thank you, Connie and Oliver, for the presentation and for all the hard work over the last couple of years on this.
Thank you.
You have something, Mr. Leonard?
Yeah, if I could just tack on quickly, during master plan subcommittee meeting, we sort of did a quick look at the presentation. And one of the questions that came up at that meeting was also relative to implementation. How is this being considered in the context of our capital improvements plan? And I think that was mentioned during the presentation, that the short of it is it's not in our capital improvements plan because it's not an adopted plan of the city yet. However, in response to that, we've put together a map that shows some of the upcoming projects in our capital improvement plans. That was included in your packet. We've got some hard copies over there as well. In short, some of the projects that are on the close horizon are definitely considering this. Some of them, for example, one of them is being led by the DDA, who's been an active partner in this project as well. And if you have any questions about that, I guess I would just say we can tee them up now. If it's not something we can address this evening, we can certainly address it at the working session when we're talking about the capital improvement plan more in depth. But I just did want to clarify that, despite this, the overlap here, I just want to be clear that any scopes in our capital improvements plan have yet to incorporate this. So when you're looking at this map, I need you to consider that really to fully implement sections of this, it would drastically change the scope, and accordingly it might drastically change the amount of capital improvements the city could undertake. So.
All right, thank you. So at this point, I'm going to open the public hearing on this and invite members of the audience here to come up and speak to us about this. You may speak for up to 3 minutes. Please remember to identify yourself by name and address. And the podium can go up and down with the little switch to your right if that is convenient for you. I think it's, there you go. And then our video goes out. That's magic. Not your fault, but.
So my name is Vince Crusoe, 556 Glendale Circle. I'm here representing the Allens Creek Watershed Group. I was part of the CAC group that worked on this, and there's several members here tonight who I'd like to thank their members or their participation. Connie and Oliver and the staff did a lot of work on this. Appreciate that. Generally, I would say there's a lot of support from the Watershed Group. I'm also a board member of the Sierra Club Huron Valley Group, and they have been very supportive over the years for a greenway plan. Other communities have had great successes with greenways. I think this is where a lot of communities are going, making walkable, bikeable communities. These are the communities that are going to survive, especially in suburban areas. They're working very hard to attract younger people who want to be able to walk and bike, especially walk and bike to work. And this proposal could be a huge benefit to the city of Ann Arbor, getting people out of their cars, biking to work, walking to work, meeting their neighbors, getting in touch with the environment, getting outside, saving money. A lot of communities have said that these greenways have paid for themselves with the amenity value, the increased property value, the increased interest in living near the greenway. It has a lot of opportunities for the city of Ann Arbor that we really need to, I think, embrace, and this will be a signature project for many generations, I think. One of the options I think we need to look at is floodplain mitigation. Most of this greenway is in the floodplain floodway. When it was first proposed, that was one of the discussions that was made to try and reduce the flood hazard. The drain office at the time met with the Allen Street Group and agreed that, yeah, opening up the floodplain and the floodway will definitely reduce flood hazard, will probably reduce the size of the floodplain, reduce flood insurance costs. We'll take some homes, many homes, probably if it's done right, many homes out of the floodplain, and we have hundreds and hundreds of homes that are at risk. Just this late year in October, we had a 9-inch rain in Kalamazoo that caused major flooding. In June 23, Midland had a 7-inch rain that caused major flooding. So we're having much bigger rainfall events due to climate change and global warming that we have to try and get out in front of. We have many communities, parts of communities at risk in Ann Arbor. The Old West Side is particularly at risk. I think we need to make sure that we preserve that neighborhood. It's probably one of the most valuable neighborhoods in the city. As far as U of M is concerned, when Jim Costivo was at the CAC meetings, he had told me that he felt that the university could work with the Greenway. Later in those meetings, he backed away from that. What I've understand from many sources is that U of M really would not be impacted much in an effort to do a greenway near their university. The current design does not show it going near the university. Early on, there was some talk of that. I think that we can work with the university. The university, will have huge benefits with this greenway. On our website, the Allen Creek Watershed Group said I have a photo of probably hundreds of people walking down the track to get to the stadium. So the first day that this greenway is open, and if it runs along that area, we'll have thousands and thousands of users walking down this greenway who will talk to their friends, talk to their neighbors, will allow us to get grant money because of the number, we can just list the number of people walking on the greenway will be tremendous from the day it's open. So I think we need to work with the university. I think their mission should be, and I think it is, one that works with the community, improves the environment, reduces flood hazard, and I think they will be good stewards, but we just need to work with them more and try and get them on board. And I think that would make a tremendous benefit. There's a great spot down by the stadium that has an old railroad train turntable. There's a very wide area there that could be a park space, could be an art center or an art display area that is not on the plan currently, but was initially as a potential area. I think that is along the U of M properties that could be a real gem adding to this greenway. So thanks much for all your work on this too. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the comments. Anyone else like to address the commission?
Hi, my name is Ed Vilmetti. I live at 1210 Brooklyn, which is near the south end of the trail, not too near to it. The cost estimates, I want to see if there's any refinement to that because it sounds like most of the expense is going to be at the north end of the trail, and that the south end of the trail is relatively simple and doesn't have as much in the way of either structure being constructed or right-of-way that would be picked up. And so I think it may be a little bit misleading in terms of trying to assess the expense. If this trail really is probably going to be constructed in 3 parts and thought of in 3 parts, it'd be good to have a breakdown of construction estimates and costs for each of those parts. I've walked from my house to Argo Dam any number of times. There is sort of a trail that you can follow that keeps you mostly off of the busier parts of the street that isn't signed at all, but if you know your way around the neighborhood, you can get from here to there and not too bad. Like the presenter said, the hardest part is crossing Main Street. And I would guess that most of the expense in doing this is crossing Main Street and crossing an active railroad track. So, you know, it's nice to say it's a 2.5 mile trail, but really the southern third of it is not anywhere near as intense a trail construction as the northern 2/3. I would hazard a guess that if you broke it down into individual projects, that the first mile south from Argo Park is going to be where most of the costs are. And so I'd appreciate it if the assessment of comparables really reflected that. Since I think it's perfectly reasonable to spend a bunch of money to make pedestrian access to the river from the west side of town, that seems like a noble goal. I think it's not as easy as it's going to be as it might be to get access to railroad rights of way, and I'd caution you all to be very conservative on your estimates of how easy it is to get an active railroad user to cooperate, but hopefully that'll happen to the extent that it's needed. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Those are good points. Any other?
I am Joe O'Neill. I chair the Treeline Conservancy. I last talked with you when you were on worldwide TV out on Industrial Highway with the council. I cannot come up here without playing with this device. Is this it?
There you go.
What will they think of next? What will they think of next? The Treeline Conservancy passed a resolution. It has several whereases which establish the fact that we are able to pass such a resolution and that we're qualified to do it. But the essence of the resolution is, it is hereby resolved that the Treeline Conservancy is in full support of the proposed master plan as prepared by the City of Ann Arbor staff and consultant. 100% of us voted for it. Now, I know we're appreciative to Connie, and appreciative to Oliver, and appreciative to Neil, and appreciative to the CAC, and all of the people that attended the hearings, and to you and the rest of Ann Arbor. However, the work is just beginning. The mountain is getting very steep. I think we have reached the tree line, and I warn you all, what's ahead is going to be a great view, but it's not going to be easy. A lot of complexities. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks for being the having this as your brainchild many years ago. Anyone else like to address the commission on this?
What do our student guests think?
Anyone else? Last chance. Then we're going to talk for hours. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing with that. And I'll start by reading the motion and asking for support from the commissioners before we begin discussion. There are actually two motions. The first is the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby adopts the Treeline Allen Creek Urban Trail Plan Master Plan of 2017 as an element of the City of Ann Arbor Master Plan. And the second motion reads, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the City Council adopt the Treeline Allen Creek Urban Trail Master Plan as an element of the City of Ann Arbor Master Plan. Can I have commissioners move this? I have to pick now. Commissioner Weatherby and I think Commissioner Milstein, and you were very close. You'll have another chance at council, hopefully. So with that, we'll begin discussion, and I'm going to suggest, because there's a lot of things we could talk about here, maybe what we can do is, as commissioners, is start with, if you have any questions that you think are really relevant to this evening, passing this. Obviously, there are many questions about how the future for the Treeline Trail will unfold, and we could spend all night talking about many of those. But if there's something here that really is a burning question, I would ask that we maybe go around and give each commissioner a chance to ask a question or two, and then go into maybe some discussion after that. So is there anyone who would like to start on, has a question that they would like to ask? Well, we've still got, Oliver's still with us before his, is he still up, or Connie is still with us? No.
I'll start.
Commissioner Gibb Randall.
This is very exciting, first of all, I'd like to say. I'm curious about the crossings. If you're thinking about some of the hawk kind of flashing things happening, the conceptual stuff is conceptual and looks really cool. But I'm just wondering how you might envision thinking about how it fits into the rest of the context of the city in terms of pedestrian crossing and safety and things like that.
So I think there's probably a whole toolbox of ideas for crossings, and those could include rapid flashing beacons. They could include bump outs at intersections to make the crossing shorter than what it is right now. They could include, some sort of an identity that shows some symbol that that the cars are actually in a non-motorized environment. So. Slowing cars down in that way, hawk signals. I think there's just so many options out there for crossings, and we have to kind of get down to the detail of which on-street sections we're talking about before we identify which ones apply best to each intersection. So, you want to add anything to that, Oliver?
I'll just say, I think, one of the things that we really tried to do on this was to minimize those crossings, and so for instance, from the north end down to the William Street, which would be that zone 1, and there's only an at-grade crossing at, which would be at Summit, Felch Street, and then at Liberty at that plaza. So your, goal 1 was, well, let's just minimize the amount of crossings that we have to do. And then a lot of those other streets tend to be slower streets where those things like RRFBs and bump outs and stuff can really help make those good crossing points.
Yeah. And then just one other quick thing, and that is when we were reviewing the Kingsley project, they showed the easement along the railroad side. And in your map, it shows it going through the other side of the property, which is the parking lot, which doesn't feel as intuitive. So and maybe we can just go to that one.
Sure.
Way back.
I think that actually may be shown in the right spot, but there's another piece of property between the
Is that
railroad
what it
tracks.
is?
Yeah, there's 2 other properties actually in between the railroad
Maybe
tracks
that's what
and
I'm
where
getting
Kingsley
confused
is.
about.
So the red lines are the property lines, and so what there is, so there's, this sliver is the what was that one?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's a thin little teeny sliver that's 30 feet
Right.
wide. And then this bigger chunk, just to the east of that thin sliver is the Burt Forest.
Got it. Yep, that's my confusion.
Yeah,
Yep.
so we
Yeah.
have the alignment shown as it was approved by City
Right.
Council.
Because in the beginning, they were thinking about taking it through the parking lot, which
Right.
didn't feel nearly as intuitive as
Right.
along the railroad tracks. Okay.
And the advantages, our team had a chance to look at those site plans when they came through to make sure we were coordinating, and we will continue to do that as projects
That's
come
great.
through across planning review desk.
Okay, great. All right, thanks.
While we're talking about this section of trail, I was going to ask about that. So that 30-foot wide section, that property owner is not interested in cooperating with, and is that what happened? Because that 30 feet wide happens to be exactly the kind of width you need to run the trail through right next to the tracks. And
You mean in this location
Yes,
right
yeah,
here? We didn't pursue that because the Kingsley condominium project
see.
was offering an easement through their property, so we didn't need to go there. But that you know, gets to the other opportunities that might arise over time, as if it turns out that an adjacent property owner wants to be a partner in this, we would certainly consider an adjacent area if it actually improved the alignment in some way.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Commissioner Weatherby, you have a question?
So I think my question is mostly sort of a staff-related, because as one of the commenters said, the south end is maybe less, because it is more on-street. I know there are projects coming up or potential projects in those areas. How, and I know we had a letter also from the AAATA of the kind of coordination, you know, if this is approved, if council says yes on December 18th, or, you know, does this start from staff kind of thinking about things on December 19th of projects that are coming forward? You know, I mean, I assume that that's adding a big chunk of work and kind of thought to how is it going to affect the bus systems? How is it going to affect on-street and projects? And I guess I'm just a little, like, how does that happen so we don't end up, you know, do I know a new street project and new development project in January that 4 years down the road, gosh, we should have done that?
No, I guess I'll take the
Sure,
first step
sure.
at that. It's definitely, well, to take a step back, when we are designing capital improvement projects, the city, I think, is very successful in doing that coordination with service providers like AATA. We also work with public safety providers, you know, to make sure we're effectively communicating. And we also do the same through the design process. So, you know, there were some comments, for example, from the ride. And absolutely, when we get to the detailed design, we're going to be coordinating with them to make sure that those systems do function and they're not conflicts. In fact, I think at the end of the day, the realization of this trail will probably help, you know, those kind of connections. But to your question about what happens on December 19th, you know, that is the hard work that one of the speakers talked about. Some of the capital improvements, for example, when you look at this map, they might simply be a water main project, and it might parallel or be on one of these right-of-ways where we're talking about it on street. Right now, that doesn't mean we're repaving that street necessarily. Or it might be we are doing a cut and just replacing the water main as opposed to that scale. So I doubt, frankly, in the capital improvement plan that's going to be drafted now based on the projects that have been assembling to date, that there's going to be a lot of change. But over the course of the next year, for projects that are in design, absolutely, we're going to be looking at those. So, for example, when the DDA is looking at Ashley and First, they've been a partner. We're going to look at these options as part of the design phase of that. But there are going to be hard decisions down the road that when we're doing a water main somewhere, that might mean that we're not achieving the goal, even though we're making an investment there. It doesn't automatically mean we're going to rebuild that street, move the curb. So, but we have to be really smart that we're making investments so that when that happens, we're not putting the water main in the wrong place. Does that help at all? The short answer is it's going to be a long, complicated process. We don't have the cost appended into all these projects as to what it would take to accomplish that. It's going to be some combination of our work and that estimate out of this, you know, linking that with the other work that we might trying to achieve previously to adoption of this plan.
First, Commissioner Ackerman had, and then Commissioner Milstein after that.
Thank you. I'm trying to piece together slides 40 and 39. Do your lettered phases line up with your numbered phases? Do they roll into each other? So do A, B, and C roll up into one north zone?
Yep.
Would D and E be, would D be central zone and F and E be?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of, oh yeah, I gotta come over here. So essentially, what you see on page 40 there, that those lettered zones A through F, that whole thing collectively is that north zone,
Okay.
zone 1 on slide 39. So it's sort of a zoom in just on that section
Understood.
and starting to break that area down into some more project areas.
Okay, great, sorry. So to that point, actually that clarifies a lot of my questions, so I appreciate it. To the near-term wins, I was looking at what is not included in the $55 million that we're talking about. Some being bioswale, rain gardens, those flood mitigation aspects. Would there be grant opportunities down the road looking specifically at flood mitigation that could also feed into funding some of these pedestrian and cyclist improvements as well?
Grant funding, was that your
Yeah.
question?
I think to the
Yeah.
Watershed Council bringing, plenty of opportunities for grant funding for
Yeah, we would be
rain
looking
gardens.
for grant funding for
Wonderful.
other stormwater possibilities. For example, EPA dollars were used to fund the wetlands and some of the trails in the Milliken State Park and on the Detroit waterfront. And so that's an example of something that was done through a federal grant that helped stormwater management. There's also other FEMA grants that might be possible. We're looking at some opportunities for some FEMA funding through this as well.
And I think about some of the grant funding we've gotten for rain gardens, and they've also contributed to things like bump outs and contributed to, and so there may be some blurred lines about where they can help the pedestrian improvements as well, is what
They
I'm trying to
can.
get at. Okay.
Yes, and you'd also have to look at kind of multiple sources of fundings in some
Yeah, of course.
regard. The berm opening is a good example of needing to seek out multiple sources of funding to accommodate all the things they want to do in that.
Just to add one thing too, just to be clear too, the cost estimate does include stormwater management for the trail portion that's being built.
It'd be in addition to, okay, interesting.
So
Okay.
that 20 feet of pavement and trail space, the management of all that water would be included. It doesn't include, bigger picture stormwater management things that affect areas, outside of where the trail would be.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Then the near-term wins that you pointed to as kind of, starting point to give people idea of what access could mean. Are those things that we're planning on rolling into our CIP moving forward?
So our.
Because those are outside of the cost.
You mean those north zone projects?
No, even, so in the do not include list, they are labeled as other trail opportunities shown on the framework plan.
Some of the other trail opportunities are may be funded through projects. There is an example of some DDA projects that are coordinating projects or other opportunities like the First and Ashley corridors, William Street, potential cycle track on William Street, Huron Street, and some other areas. So some of those are funded and some are not.
Okay.
So we'd have to look at that.
Wonderful. No, I think this is great. This is the third time I've seen the presentation. It gets better each time. So you guys are rock stars. Really appreciate the work, and it gets more exciting the further it comes along.
Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Milstein, you had a question?
Yes, two questions and a quick comment. The first question is in regards to Liberty and First. You had pointed that area out as that's pretty much the hub to get to the trail or from the trail into downtown. Can you elaborate a little bit more, just because that area is very, it's just an odd area of the way the sidewalks go and the railroad right there. Can you just give us a little bit of a better idea of what that might look like?
So that's an interesting area because downtown is sort of moving west. I mean, we've got all sorts of activity right around that intersection now, if you like ice cream and other things. So right now, it's a big wide intersection. You can see in this sketch that we're showing opportunities for doing bump outs to make the crossing distances in that intersection shorter. The area that actually runs along the parking lot here, if you've walked along that, you know there's not really a sidewalk there right now. So this would help by shifting the curb out, perhaps narrowing the street in that location. There's a study going on to see if it's feasible to do a conversion from one-way to two-way traffic there. So, you know, that would incorporate a sidewalk component and then connecting back into 415 West Washington is another opportunity. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's, I think the sketch really shows what the opportunities are there in mostly narrowing those road sections and slowing traffic and providing better opportunities for non-motorized crossings.
Making it a two-way would probably be helpful, since most of the time I walk by there on a regular basis. Since I live right there, it's usually used as a two-way illegally, unfortunately.
Right.
So, okay, that gives me a really good idea there. And then the one thing that I was a little disappointed by, but I understand why it's happening, is the whole Hoover and State area. Also an area that I travel fairly frequently, and it's widely used by University of Michigan students and faculty and staff as well. And it's a very congested area, especially along State Street. And so that's the only area that I sort of said to myself, well, it's not ideal. I mean, it's actually less than ideal. And I'm actually really disappointed that the university is not coming to the plate here to play ball with us. And so I would encourage whatever could happen down the road. Obviously, there's nothing that we could do at this point. But as one of the speakers said, you know, I think we need to keep working on this with them, because there are better ways to connect in that area. And then just a third, more of a comment. I was doing a little bit of research on the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, and I was really surprised by where all of their grants came from with regards to that. And I'm sure it's been already looked at, but things like banks and including National Association of Realtors, which I'm a member of, just very interesting grant funders there. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commission comments, questions right now? I'll just say, you know, I definitely appreciate, and I agree with Commissioner Ackerman that every time I see this, I think you guys are delivering the message better, and that's obviously really important in terms of getting people excited, you know, getting opportunities for people to see somehow what the trail could be like, whether they are, you know, it's a guided walking tour of the route or something like that. I know I've walked sections of it, or what I thought might be sections of it, and it's really exciting when you can get those perspectives, especially the ones that aren't on the street. So share some of the disappointment that, you know, there are sections of the trail that at this point we can't make it work along those elevated sections or sections that you can't get to from a car. But I know that you know, that could change over time. I can say from, you know, I've lived in a couple cities where the bike trails have been tremendous opportunities for commuting, and they were built as bike trails, not quite as a recreational trail, but and become very, very popular. In Chicago, I'm going to go visit the 606 in a couple weeks. These things can take time, but I was part of a community group back in 1993 that started that idea going, and, you know, I obviously didn't do a lot of work on it, but it did take off, and I think, you know, we'll have our work cut out for us, as Joe O'Neill has said, but once these ideas can take hold, they can take on a life of their own. And so you guys have really done a great job getting it to that point where all of our imaginations can get excited about this.
Thank you.
The one question I'll just ask, I mean, I know the answer, but I think it's important we all hear this. The estimated cost, and I do think it makes sense, the speaker that suggested that somehow we look at breaking that up by section so that might help facilitate how we put that in the CIP at some point, and how we can look at taking advantage of when we have funding. But that cost is in 2017 dollars, right? And
Right, yes.
so if it takes us 10 or 20 years, that cost will predictably escalate, and we have to somehow not forget that as we go forward, and be able to put some kind of a factor for escalation on there, so that we're not surprised later on in the process and think we got money raised only to find out that we're millions of dollars short somewhere.
Right.
But thank you again for all your work.
Thank you. Can I clarify one thing
Yeah.
about the breakdown of costs? Those are available. We've provided those to the Treeline Conservancy for the development of their business plan. So we have that breakdown available for the Conservancy to use as they're crunching some numbers at this stage.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Mills?
Thanks. You guys should be really jealous. This was a fantastic committee assignment to be on, because this was really a well-run process. And I really appreciated getting to see it firsthand. Mine is a question that I think that I know the answer to, but I think it would be helpful for other people to hear this. Throughout your presentation, you've been talking about this plan being flexible and being able to accommodate changes in the future. And this is something that happens to all of our master plans, right? They are created at a point in time, and especially when you think about the feasibility of what is envisioned and possible at that time, you have to draw a line somewhere. Can you talk to us a little bit about how, as new opportunities arise that are not shown on your dark-colored lines right now, how that flexibility works? So I'm guessing that we're paying attention to the text and the guiding principles, but.
Sure. So there is, just as a matter of how the master plan works, there is narrative in the text that talks about flexibility. So it allows for that flexibility. So that's just narrative in the text. What is really going to facilitate this flexibility is the relationships that we have built over the last 2 years. The Treeline Conservancy did a lot of the work of a conservancy, quite frankly, in contacting property owners, because that was a really good role for them. So Mr. O'Neill and Ms. Morris and Oliver and myself met so many people along the corridor, and frankly, some said we're not ready yet to be part of this vision. That doesn't mean they're not going to be ready in the future, and so we've developed contacts with these people that I think is really going to serve us well over the next several years as we tackle this. And that includes the University of Michigan, continuing to communicate with them, continuing to communicate with Watco, the holding company of the rail line, and Ann Arbor Railroad. No one really ever talked to them before, and we've had several meetings with them, and I think they are supportive of the idea, and there's a lot of folks out there who are supportive of the idea, but we just need to go that next step. So we have a list a mile long of people that we need to continue to talk to. The Conservancy is doing a tremendous job getting their feelers out there into the community. We've provided them with dozens of brochures to hand out to people and continue this story. So they're sort of going to be the people in the field having those further discussions and partnering with the city in actually making some decisions about easements and that sort of thing, whether it shows up in the plan today like that or not. So it just allows us to move that line if we need to, if it makes for a better route. Does that answer your question? Oh, yeah, that's great.
The other thing that we're doing to help kind of facilitate this as, being kind of a living thing in a way, is that we're also building what's called a story map. This is a Esri mapping tool. But the entire master plan report lives in the story map, and we're kind of putting the final tweaks on that, and that'll be live, and there'll be a link available to that. So that has the full text of the master plan, but then kind of in parallel to the text is actually a whole set of interactive maps and live data for the routes and what's being proposed and all the alternatives and all of that background is in there. So city staff, that's already functioning and working on the servers and in the city's IT group. So city staff will actually be able to update that plan and that line work, and that'll update kind of the online version of this document. And so that'll be the living version. The text can change, the narrative can change, as the plan moves forward. So it's kind of the intent of putting that piece together.
So all that work we did in getting this data and information is all going to live in that story map and through GIS layers and understanding of who the property owners are, what type of utilities are there. That's going to be our guide in helping us.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Briggs?
Yeah, so just to echo the thanks and the excitement around this project, it's obviously really exciting to be moving forward and thinking about the realization of this sometime from now. And as one of the commenters mentioned, I mean, this is the sort of project that is really attractive. It drives development. It drives a desire to live near this trail as we move forward. But I think it just and it will increase property values along that. I think that it also supports our desire to bring more affordable housing to the community as well, in terms of thinking long-term about the downside of driving up property values and bringing in development is that increased cost for those who are living here and want to live here. So I think it really supports our other efforts that we're also trying to do in terms of increasing our supply of affordable housing and thinking about how the downside of this, which is it's really great, but it's supporting our other efforts as well.
Thank you. I want to mention one other thing, which is I'm going to continue to lobby for the phase 2 of this planning to connect it down to Ellsworth, because I think, speaking about Commissioner Briggs' comments, the viability of this as a commuter route is that it connects to places besides just downtown. So that, and I think there is from what I understand, a more viable path, an easier path getting down there. So, any other comments, questions? I think we're probably ready to take a vote on this. So, all the commissioners who are in favor of the 2 motions as read, please raise your right hand and say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you all very much. Nice job. We have just a couple things to finish up here tonight. I know it's not 11 o'clock. It's hard to believe. The first of which is another opportunity for audience participation. So if there's anyone before you vacate the premises, if anyone who would like to speak to the commission on any item at all, you can come on up to the podium for up to 3 minutes. Last chance. Okay. So after that, is there any other commission proposed business for this evening? Commissioners, anything? I'm seeing nothing. I looked twice. Next is I will entertain a motion for adjournment. Anyone? Commissioner Gibb Randall and Commissioner Mills seconded. All in favor of adjournment, please say yes. 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 That appears to be unanimous. We are adjourned. Thank you all.